All right. I love that I look so focused when I come into these calls.
I love that I look
Oh,
so focused
hold
when
on.
I come in.
Yay. Okay. Oh, the joys of technology. Welcome. We are here for a Tuesday talk. And um, this week, so I'm Hannah Levin with Heartfelt Wellbeing. And this week, we're looking at the shift from Vata season into Kapha season. So I'm broadcasting this on January 23rd, which is in the Southeast where I'm living. We're starting to feel like a little inkling of Kapha season coming in. We've had some really cold temperatures, some really cold weather, snow, winds, and we're looking ahead. This week is going to be a little warmer, a little more rainy, and it's going to be um, more kapha. More kapha. So if you're joining me live, feel free to participate in the chat. I can see the chat, and I love getting some interaction here. I much prefer being live on Zoom or being even better live in person. But right now, you can interact with me if you're here live via Facebook. And later, this will be posted on my YouTube channel as well, which is Heartfelt Yoga and Ayurveda with Hannah as well. And so you can share this with friends if you find it particularly interesting. So a little overview if Ayurveda is pretty new for you, and a review for those who might like a review. We have these three doshas in Ayurveda. So doshas are made up of two elements. Ayurveda is a 5-element system. Doshas are made up of two of those elements. Vata is made up of air and ether. Pitta is made up of fire and water. And Kapha is made up of earth and water. And each season is governed by one predominant dosha. So, from an Ayurvedic perspective, there are 3 seasons. There's Vata, Pitta, and Kapha season. Winter can be a little complex because it's the season that contains, if we're looking at a 4-season calendar, winter is comprised of Vata dominating during the beginning of the winter and then moving into Kapha for late winter. So that's how I'm going to be talking about it here, is early winter and late winter. So there's kind of these two halves of winter, and there's a little like zigzagging back and forth between the two in the middle. So Vata has these qualities, or what we call gunas, of mobile, dry, light, cold, subtle, and rough. And so we spend the first part of the winter really pacifying all of those qualities. So we're making sure that things are warm. We're making sure that we have moisture. We're making sure that rough things are getting more smooth. So this might show up in terms of dry qualities in the body a lot, but we also might see it in terms of our minds, that we have more anxiety, overwhelm, insomnia, things like that during Vata season. And Vata is something that is very stirred up in our culture in general because there's so much multitasking and going in lots of different directions, and um, kind of that ping-ponging awareness of like not not being fully focused and zeroed in. So we can tend to feel very affected during Vata season, which can either lead us into being more stirred up and anxious, or into shutdown and hibernation, like depression mode. So either one of those is an imbalance. So we want to use these qualities, balance the qualities with food, with lifestyle practices, with herbs, Um, and that can really help us navigate well. Then we switch into Kapha season, and we're going to use those same techniques of food and lifestyle and herbs. However, Kapha season is made up of basically like the opposite elements. So remember, Vata is made up of earth, sorry, made up of air and space. So Vata is kind of like swirling around and it's like ungrounded, like way up. And space is the principle of expansion. So it's like this ever expanding energy. And then the air is directional movement. So there's this lightness that's part of Vata that can be challenging, especially if you have more Vata in your constitution or you're in Vata stage of life. Okay. Then we're switching into Kapha season, which is kind of the opposite because the elements are earth and water. So they're heavy. They're heavy. So we get into the springtime and we feel more lethargic. And so the qualities of kapha are heavy, dense, wet, as opposed to dry and vata, cool, cloudy, and static or stagnant. Yeah. So in every way except one, Vata and Kapha are polar opposites. The one quality that they share is cold. So the thing that we can do for all of winter, whether we're aware of it being Vata predominant or Kapha predominant, is that we can focus on warmth. So that's a general good focus. Okay, for everybody is just like warm beverages, warm clothing, warm baths, warm relationships, warm teas. Like we're just going to focus on warmth. But other than that, things are really, really, really different. So I want to go through some different areas of life. I know a lot of people just think Ayurveda is all about food. And while there is a component of Ayurveda that's about food, it's a lot more vast than just food. So I will touch on food, but I want to share about some other aspects of life first. And then we'll look specifically at food. So, one thing that we might connect with is how we're moving our bodies. So the ways that we exercise. And if you're allergic to the word exercise, just think of it as body movement. Okay. So how we move in Vata season is we want to be doing more grounding practices. So, with yoga, we're doing more like low to the ground, more gentle, just think grounding. We can still like get our heart rate up a little bit and we want to build warmth in our bodies, but we're working more with this balancing the lightness with heaviness. So more grounding energy in our practices. So we might work more with some of the stretching or softening practices during Vata season, as well as a little bit of cardio to warm us up. And then when we switch into Kapha season, it's like go time for movement because those heavy elements lead us to feel a lot of inertia. And so if we can really implement heat building activity, strength building activity, so this is the season to do lots of cardio, longer workouts. We're in general going to tend to be a lot less depleted during kapha season. And especially if you have more kapha in your constitution or you're in kapha stage of life. Kapha stage of life is early stage, so like 0 to 25. Yeah. So kapha energy can really be challenged with stamina. Like that's a great thing to think about during kapha season is like challenging our stamina. with our physical exertion. Okay, so this is one switch from Vata to Kapha. Vata, we're being more gentle, and then Kapha, we're adding some more challenge. Okay. And if you follow me with yoga, you'll see right about now, like the class that I taught this morning was a little more challenging than the classes have been like through December and early January. It's like the sap's starting to rise, and you might be feeling like a little like, oh, I've gained a couple pounds this winter, that like, grounding, heavy balancing, and ready to move a little bit more. So more of that like strengthening, challenging yourself a little bit more. Excellent. Another thing that you'll notice moving from Vata to Kapha, you might notice, is changes in your skin. So during Vata season, you're probably dealing with a lot more issues with dryness and maybe even rough patches on your skin. And that's because the environment is generally much drier and we're using heat more. So whether you have a wood stove or forced air or whatever, we're in environments where we're being dried out. And we need to both focus on hydration from what we're eating and drinking, as well as what we're putting on our skin. And I'll talk more about that, the eating and drinking part in the food section. But in terms of what we're putting on our skin, so I do encourage folks in the winter to do abhyanga or self oil massage. However, when we switch over into Kapha season, you might realize that the oil doesn't feel as good to you. It might feel like this extra layer that just feels like excessive. And so it might be that you want to start using a little less oil or just focusing more on dry brushing as your self-massage practice instead of oil. Again, the more kapha you have in your constitution, the more you'll want to do that switch. Those of us that have more vata in our constitution will probably need still some oil on our skin, and pitta can be kind of in between. So um, that need for a little more drying out once we get in kapha season, which tends to be more wet. It's like the season of mud, right? So the environment is going to be more moist. There's more rain, perhaps. There's just more moisture available. And so taking advantage of that in terms of receiving it naturally into our bodies in the environments. Maybe we're wearing a little less clothing too, not like 5 layers as we were during Vata season. So building up the heat in the body from exercise, and also maybe noticing if you need as much moisture on your skin during Kapha season is another thing to explore. Allergies often come into play as we shift from Vata to Kapha season. And so this is something else to really get out ahead of. This is why I'm making this video now. So we aren't just getting into Kapha season and being like, oh my gosh, there's all this mucus and congestion, and where did that come from? So that heavy quality that's we could say is the kapha quality is showing up in mucus can really catch people by surprise when this shift happens from Vata season into Kapha season. So we might be dealing more with like dry nasal passages, dry eyes, dry ears during Vata season. And it's great to oil them. Put a little bit on your pinkies, stick your pinkies up your nose, put a little more on your pinkies, stick it in your ears, right? You put castor oil in your eyes at night before you go to bed. Not if you have contacts in, but we can really hydrate during Vata season. When we get into Kapha season, you might still keep doing some of these practices because they're helpful to catch pollens and things, like especially oiling the nose is really helpful to make those nasal hairs sticky so that when we're breathing, pollens get stuck in the nasal hairs and don't go actually into our systems and create issues. However, we want to be mindful of the general quality of like there's going to be more mucus, more stuffiness, more congestion in kapha season. And so really looking at, and we'll look at this with food, like how can we bring in some drying and maybe even some herbs to help with balancing for allergies. And my favorite herb for allergies is nettles. I have other videos about making infusions on my YouTube channel. You can find out how to make nettles infusion. And it's really, it's like I accidentally started taking nettles in my 20s when I decided to go off of birth control pills. And a friend of mine was like, this is really good. It's a blood nourisher. It'll help like nourish your body. And I started taking the nettles and my allergies went away. And I was like, what is happening? Like, how did that happen? Because I used to be on every single allergy med out there. Um, and I would get really sick every spring and fall. And so nettles was really my first herbal ally before I ever learned any Ayurveda. Was like, wow, herbs can really be powerful. So I really encourage you to start doing nettles before that wetness and pollens and stuff show up in your environment, because it needs to build up in the system. So I could do a whole talk on nettles, but that's my favorite for allergies. So checking in, like, do you tend to struggle with seasonal allergies? If so, start doing some sort of protocol. Maybe you know what works for you. Maybe it's quercetin, maybe it's cutting dairy out of your diet, maybe it's like all sorts of things. And if you aren't sure where to start, try doing nettles infusion every day and get that going before that big kapha season shift. Another area where we'll experience some change in the in that seasonal shift from Vata to Kapha season is in intimacy. So this is kind of interesting to think about too, is that in Vata season, Vata has a tendency towards depletion. And so Vata season, there's a general like, don't be sexually active as often. And then Kapha season, because it's supported by all of this earth and water elements and it's more dense and grounded, is like more sexual activity can be sustained. Like it's not as depleting. So of course you want to do that in the most beneficial and honoring and loving ways, right? And it's just interesting to think about, like when we look at like the yamas and the niyamas, brahmacharya is like, well, sometimes it's interpreted as the restraint of sexual urges or celibacy, but we could also interpret it as right use of that energy. And so it has its seasons too. And that season of more exertion in that department of our lives is kapha season. And so if you've been feeling like, oh, I've been a little down and like my libido's tanked during, December, January, like that's totally natural, actually, especially if you're more Vata predominant or in Vata stage of life. And so check out what happens as you're in Kapha season and get more and more towards the spring. That's when all the new life is coming and all the baby animals get born and all these things. And so that energy, that sap that's rising can be more tended to and not as depleting for us. So another thing to think about. So I do want to, let's see if I can do this here. I want to do a little screen share and look at foods to specifically talk about this. So this is from a handout that I made for a retreat that I just led, the Habit Makers Retreat in Abingdon. And so I'm just going to talk through this just so you can have kind of an idea of what this looks like. This isn't an exhaustive list. I haven't covered everything here. And You might find other Ayurvedic resources that say things a little bit different, and that's kind of the way it rolls. Like different people have different things that they focus on, or ways in which of conceiving this, but it's generally the same idea. So these blanks here, the dosha for early winter is Vata. So we just went over that. Dosha for late winter is Kapha. So in early winter, Vata season, we want to focus on warm, moist, and heavy foods. So again, we're grounding, we're bringing in moisture, we're bringing in warmth to balance the cold, dry, light, mobile, subtle, rough, right? In late winter, we want to focus on still warm, but we're going to flip the other two. So we want foods to be more drying and more light. In general, you don't really need to know your specific constitution or your imbalances to start practicing Ayurveda. You can simply start living in alignment with the seasons and see how you'll feel so much better initially, for sure. And then you'll find like, oh, that's a little too drying or a little too heating or a little too, right? That if you have more pitta in your constitution, the warming that's part of both early and late winter, it might need to be kept on kind of a low simmer, right? Whereas if you have more Vata or Kapha in your constitution, bringing in heat through warming foods, so eating cooked foods for sure. And then in late winter Kapha season, we really want to focus on more heating spices as well. So spices, well, we'll get to that in just a moment, but with spices, I'll just say that during Vata season, we really want to work on having spices that are supportive for Agni, our digestive fire. So carminative spices that aren't so heating that they're drying, because there's already enough drying going on in early winter, right? So this would be things more like cinnamon, cumin, things like that. In late winter, we can do more of the like cayenne, wasabi, jalapeno, stuff like that, okay? Because that's more heating, but it's also drying. So if you already have a lot of drying going on in your body, even in Kapha season, you might not want to do as much of the drying hot, okay? So some of this is just exploration, experimentation on your part. So the early winter tastes are sweet, sour, and salty. So this is not permission to eat a whole bunch of candy or baked goods or whatever. It's really like these are the tastes that we want to look for that are naturally occurring in the foods that we're eating: sweet, sour, salty. And then late winter tastes are going to be bitter, pungent, and astringent. Bitter, pungent, and astringent. Those are opposite. There's 6 tastes that we use in Ayurveda: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, pungent, and astringent. So if you look at this, Kapha and Vata tastes are totally opposite too. So we want to incorporate things to the extent. We need all 6 tastes in every meal to feel satiated. So we're not going to totally cut out like sweet taste in the early spring or late winter time, but we're going to have less of it because the bitter, pungent, and astringent taste are going to help support the cleansing of the tissues. Okay. And if you want to really dive into this even more, I encourage you to sign up for my spring detox, which is going to happen in April. And that is really where you'll get more of the nitty gritty of like how we work with this balancing with the wisdom of opposites. So let's just look at, I'm not going to read through every single thing on this chart here, but if we look at the vegetables for early winter, we have more root vegetables, more sweet things like winter squash, sweet potatoes, things like that, as well as things that are like garlic is warming, right? And then salty, seaweed. Yeah, we want everything cooked generally this time of year, unless you have crazy hot pitta digestion, which might need some help. And then in late winter, we're moving towards more of the cleansing. Leafy greens is like takes the center stage here. So we are having beet greens, dandelion, wild greens. As we come more and more into spring, wild greens are really, really wonderful liver cleansers. So things like chickweed, dandelion, plantain, even nettles. Just be careful harvesting them. They're great to cook up and eat. This like more dense nutrition than you can get from any grown cultivated leafy green. So we have kind of a shift. It doesn't mean that you won't have a sweet potato every once in a while in late winter, or, some other root vegetables. Sure, but you might switch away from having them with like a grain to having them more over a bed of greens, something like that. Fruits in early winter, they're more sweet fruits. And we're looking more at bringing in moisture. So if you have dried fruit, we're going to soak or stew that fruit. And then we have our citruses, which are generally available in warmer climates in that winter season. We want to eat locally as much as possible too. So depending on where you are. And then in late winter, we might have apples that have carried over, maybe pears too. So those work for both. And pears are really great at clearing mucus too. So just don't put like sugar with them. Right? So if you stew some pears, that's great. And then we start having our berries later in the kapha season as we go into spring and early summer. As you can see with grains, there's a lot more grains in the early winter category than in the late winter. And that's because grains are very heavy and grounding. So in the early winter, we can have more grains. It feels really nourishing. It's the season of coming out of the harvest and like having bread, right? In the early spring, late winter, that's not so much. I mean, if you were growing your food and had all of your things in season, you would begin to see that there's some grains that will carry over, but they're going to be more of the drying grains. So things like millet especially is great to have in that late winter time. Legumes is the opposite. So legumes generally are challenging for Vata digestion during that drier time of the year because beans are drying. So we want to eat little beans during the early winter, and then going into the late winter, we can have larger beans. So this is really the season of like having chili or something, that's like spicy and beans. Don't put beans and meat in the chili together. Either have meat chili or bean chili. Beans and meat together, not a good digestive choice, especially during kapha season. It'll slow you down. Yeah, just you could try it, run it as an experiment. You'll see what I mean. Beneficial fat as well. So we have more beneficial fat during Vata season when it's really dry, and then less fats in kapha season when there's already a lot of moisture and lubrication in the environment. Again, if you have a lot of dryness in your body already, keep doing more beneficial fats, but it might feel good to you to lighten up on the fats in the late winter and see how that feels for you. Animal products in general, great and supportive during Vata season, not as beneficial during kapha season. So animal products are seen as really dense nutrition in Ayurveda, not ever to be the main show of a meal. So animal protein, as in the flesh of animals, is best eaten more as like a side dish or a condiment in a meal. So like a stir fry or a little bit mixed in with some vegetables, something like that, or maybe in a soup, right? But not as like a big hunk of meat. But that dense nutrition is more beneficial during Vata season. And then when we go into kapha season, it's better to have these lighter meats. So chicken, fish, eggs, turkey, and venison. And again, we're lightening things up. Nuts and seeds, we're going to focus more on nuts in Vata season and seeds in kapha season. You can even sprout seeds in Kapha season, and that has that new life energy that's so helpful for the late winter and spring. In the detox, we make our own sprouts too. And then here we are at spices and sweeteners. So you can see in the early winter, we're looking more at those carminative spices: cinnamon, cardamom, basil, cumin, black pepper. These don't create tons of heat in the body, but they help you digest your food. In terms of sweeteners, we're going to look at maple syrup, molasses, rice syrup, and honey as long as it's uncooked. During Kapha season, honey is the only sweetener really that is good to use during Kapha season, because honey is the only sweetener that's actually warming. Other sweeteners are cooling to the body. And so honey actually helps clear tissues. It's in a lot of formulas for Kapha. But then we also can have these more heating herbs too, spices. So things like cayenne, ginger, more, this would be like time for powdered ginger. In Vata season, it's more fresh ginger. Okay, that was a lot. And I hope that that was really kind of cool to see how things change over the course of the winter. And maybe that's totally new to you. Like, who thought that we need to be paying attention to these things? I guarantee you, if you apply just one of the things that I suggested today, that you'll start to see a difference and you might want to do more. So I welcome your questions and comments. I hope that you are enjoying your winter wherever you are, what that looks like, the shift from Vata into Kapha, and see what happens there as you run your experiments. Take good care. Nourish yourself. See you soon.